And joining us now in studio, Janice Stein, TVO's Foreign Affairs Analyst and Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs. Well, this is the stuff you're going to be teaching about for years and years and years, isn't it?
It was unbelievably dramatic to watch the events for the last 4 or 5 days in Cairo.
Well, let's focus on the military here, because the protesters in the streets of Egypt have been chanting, "The people and the army are one hand." Why do the people apparently hold the Egyptian military in such high esteem?
For 2 reasons fundamentally, Steve. First of all, this is a conscript army, so everybody serves in it. It's enormous. It's the 10th largest army in the world. But all Egyptians serve in it, and for many poor young Egyptians, this is the avenue for social mobility and for skills. So in that sense, it's got a close connection to the people. Secondly, although it's been deployed in the streets before, during food riots, for example, in 1977, it has never fired on the crowds. And so
no Tiananmen Square type
No Tiananmen
incidents.
Square incidents with the Egyptian army. And from that perspective, this is an agonizing moment for the army. You know, reports coming out of Cairo tell us that the organizing committee of the street demonstrations, because there is an informal organizing committee, one of their principal instructions to the demonstrators was hug a soldier, because they know that which way the army goes, whether you get individual conscripts going over to the demonstrators and those kinds of pictures flowing out will be absolutely crucial.
Well, help me with this conundrum here, because every Egyptian president, I gather, since the 1950s has been a senior military official.
Nasser,
and
Sadat, Mubarak,
and Mubarak, right?
All generals.
Who has needed the support of the military to stay in power. So how is it that the military can be at the same time part of the people and yet responsible for keeping, you know, what arguably are dictators who do not have the will of the people behind them in power?
It's even more complicated than that, because you're right, they have this ambivalent relationship. They're also hugely powerful in the economy, the Egyptian army. Not dissimilar to other authoritarian regimes where the army penetrates the private sector and runs businesses and big enterprises and collects enormous rents from what they're doing in the economy. It's for that reason the army is by far the most powerful institution. So the heads of the army, the chief of the defense staff, who's also, by the way, chief of the army, same person, pretty important person right now, I'm sure is sitting and thinking the crucial purpose is preserve the army and preserve the role of the military.
And the respect it has in the population.
Well, both. You want to preserve the respect, and you also want to preserve the privileges it has. How do you balance those two? So the loyalty is not to Mubarak beyond a certain point, but it is very much to the role of the military in the Egyptian regime. And I think it's going to be the military who's going to make the crucial decisions.
Although it doesn't look as if, well, certainly the vice president is not from the military per se, is he, right? He's from the Secret Service.
Well, but Suleiman, Omar Suleiman, whom well known to all us Middle East watchers, definitely comes out of the military, because he came up through the military like everybody else, then went over to the intelligence
Well, that's
side.
what I'm saying. People see him now as the guy who's responsible for, you know, torturing so many people over the years.
It's beyond that. He was nominated by Mubarak as the vice president on Saturday. I don't think anybody that's nominated by Mubarak is likely to be acceptable to the street. On the other hand, it's entirely conceivable that the chief of the defense staff will reach into the ranks and nominate somebody from within their own to oversee the transition and say gently to Mubarak, you're putting the military that you love and the Egypt that you love at risk.
Okay, let me follow up on that, because clearly the military are making their political calculations right now about what to do.
And they will be the deciders here, not the street.
Okay, so why haven't they come out and, at least so far, it seems as if they've been unwilling to give a full-throated endorsement that Mubarak is going to stay in power? Why haven't they done that yet?
For very good reason. Because if it appears, and you know, these next few days are going to be crucial, because there are going to be huge demonstrations in the streets, strikes, and by the way, they lose economically as the economy of Egypt suffers, and it is suffering. They have to make the decision, is Mubarak the obstacle to maintaining the military role in the post-Mubarak era?
And when you say they, who's the they?
So we're really talking about the chief of the defense staff, the chief of the Navy, the chief of the Army, the senior general command, who are also looking not only at what they think as a group, but the colonels who are one level down.
But it's interesting, they haven't said to Mubarak, time's up, you got to go.
They haven't made a decision.
They haven't fired on the people either.
No,
They're
they have
taking a
not.
middle course, I guess.
They are, because they are hoping, in effect, that they can contain the demonstrations, that they'll lose heart. And, you know, part of the strategy to remove the police from the streets was to sow fear, and that was orchestrated. That was not the police melting into the crowd. That was an orchestrated decision in the hope of raising fear and apprehension in neighborhoods so that people come out and call for order, which the military would then respond. So I think for at the military level, at least, it's still an open question whether after the big demonstrations this will simply diminish. I'm pessimistic, actually, that will happen, but when they reach the decision that Mubarak is an obstacle, that's when they will gently nudge him aside, and once they make their mind up, there's nothing he can do.
Well, the American administration has pretty plainly not gone to bat for Mubarak, and in
Absolutely
fact,
not.
So what's the military waiting for? They know that America's not going to do for him what they did for the Shah.
There's uncertainty and I think they're on the horns of a real dilemma. There's uncertainty because they're going to sacrifice one of their own. They have not done that for 60 years. They're not used to doing that. Mubarak is one of them. And when they put somebody else in place, they will put that person in place just to oversee the transition. The issue then becomes who runs in the elections, what political parties are legal, and is there a guarantee that the next president, because a presidential election is coming, will necessarily be from the military. They're rolling the dice. Mubarak is safe, known to them. If they think they can possibly keep him in power, they will. But once they come to the conclusion that it's over for Mubarak, it will be over.
Okay, so far all of the calculations we've been discussing are all domestic,
right,
internal. The international community, Egypt's allies.
There's one issue
Go ahead.
only, and it's the military-to-military relationship between the U.S. military and the Egyptian military. It's not Obama, it's not Clinton. It is between the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington and the chairman of the Egyptian military forces. It's a strong message that's come, don't fire on the crowds, and right underneath the surface is you receive enormous amount of military aid from us. That aid could be in jeopardy were you to turn and fire on the crowds.
Well, let me make sure I got this. Do you think there are private conversations happening right now between the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and maybe the head of the services in the U.S. and their counterparts in Egypt as to what politically ought to be done?
Let me put it this way. I have no doubt there are private conversations going on as to what the Egyptian army should not do.
So the American generals are saying, do not be killing your people.
Do not fire on Egyptian civilians.
Lest you risk the many billions
right.
a year that you get from us in military assistance.
That's correct. That's right. So there's a serious constraint on the Egyptian military. What they are not saying is push Mubarak out. They're not saying keep him in. That decision is a political decision which I believe the Egyptian military will make, and I think time is running out for them to make it. They're not there yet, but there's very little time left. So really, the military, the key political and economic institution in Egypt.
Is that a bit disquieting if you're watching the? I mean,
yes.
Wouldn't you like to think Barack Obama is the guy who's on the phone, you know, to the extent that anybody's giving advice or orders?
Look, he is on the phone to Mubarak, but he has no leverage. He has absolutely no leverage. So Obama is working through that military-to-military relationship, and that's how he's able to exercise his leverage. The people on the street have no leverage. They are not going to determine who the next president of Egypt is in the transitional phase. It's going to be the military that's going to make that decision.
Okay, let's return to Suleiman, who is the first vice president put in place in Egypt in 30 years.
Somebody that I've met repeatedly.
You've met him,
in Cairo.
Okay, so tell us about him.
Oh, incredibly smart, incredibly astute, very, very strategic, skilled mediator, mediated between Hamas and the PLO repeatedly. knows Egypt inside out and knows the whole region inside out.
He runs the equivalent of the CIA, right?
Yeah, but that's so misleading.
Okay, so because that's what you keep hearing.
Yeah, because the CIA is constrained in the American system.
And he's not.
And he's not. And
So is it accurate when I've heard these reports over the weekend saying this is a guy responsible for torturing thousands of people? Is that fair to say?
No, not directly yet, because he's not in charge of the security police,
Okay.
right? He's in charge of the intelligence network. So he's not the commander of the security police, but he has an extremely close relationship with the president. And Suleiman will be motivated to save Mubarak. So if Mubarak goes, Suleiman goes at the same time.
He does. So he doesn't take over and become the next guy for X number of years.
I think if the military reached the decision that Mubarak is not savable under the present political conditions, Suleiman will not be either, because he's so strongly identified with Mubarak and has been for 10 years. He saved Mubarak's life.
Well, let me bring another name into the mix, Mohammed al-Baradei, who
Yeah.
everybody knows from his time at the International Atomic Energy Agency.
I would call him the rootless Egyptian.
Rootless.
The rootless
He's been away.
Egyptian. He's lived out of the country. He's exactly the kind of Egyptian. You know, Boutros Ghali. Also, there's
Another Egyptian.
Another
Former
Egyptian.
head of the UN.
Former Secretary General of the UN. You know, Egypt has produced some wonderful diplomats. He's unconnected, has no grassroots support, no organization. And in the organizing committee meetings that took place this last Saturday and Sunday, the Muslim Brotherhood leaders agreed to al-Baradei as their spokesperson because he presents a reasonable face to the international community. This is a transitional leader. I doubt he will survive the transition, and I'm dubious.
Sorry, survive meaning with his life, or you mean politically?
Politically.
Okay.
And I'm dubious that the military will turn to him as the alternative to Mubarak and Suleiman. I suspect they will turn to somebody within their own ranks to oversee the transition.
So, but he's a figurehead, at least for the moment.
He's a figurehead, that's all.
And seems to have, but people seem to be rallying around him in the streets.
Again, because the streets are not organized, and you know, it's interesting. This is an uprising organized by young people in their 20s and their 30s, not organized in coherent political parties. Caught the Brotherhood by surprise. They are trailing it rather than leading it, and al-Baradei to them is a convenient spokesperson to get them from here to the post-Mubarak era, where they can then organize and compete politically in an election.
So if the military is the #1 institution in society, and above all else, its continuation and the significance of its role in society, the continuation thereof, is the most important thing for them, what gets them there? Continuity or reform?
I think what will get them there is an alternative to Suleiman and Mubarak, somebody whose name we do not yet know, that they will, when they urge Mubarak to leave the country, along with Suleiman, a military leader emerges. They will then move for reform and an opening up of the democratic process. But I doubt very much that these will be wholly free elections, because the military does not want a government run by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
But the Muslim Brotherhood, from what I hear, is 20% of the, they have
That's all.
20% support.
But they're organized. And
They're better
you
organized.
and I both know how important an organization is in politics.
Right on. Okay, Janice, very helpful. Thanks so much for coming in
It's a
tonight and helping
pleasure.
us figure this all out.